Welcome to Writer Syndrome, podcast about writing from start to finish. This episode's topic, we're getting into humor. I'm Russ and joining me as always is Tim Letney. Tim, how funny are you feeling today?
Oh man, that was really great. You know, you were a stand-up comic in a previous life, right?
Yeah.
He's not on display this morning.
Yeah, that's
You got that Stephen Katz delivery.
that's the first thing about comedy. It's all about timing.
Yeah.
Timing is everything.
It's funny. To prepare for this episode, I was gonna get like a joke horn.
Yeah. How's that gonna go?
Track down. I thought it was gonna be hysterical.
Yeah.
I tracked down some different sound files that I was going to play out loud, kind of like a radio morning show.
Oh, that would have driven me nuts when I went to go back to edit this. Son of a...
That's why I didn't do it. I was looking out for you.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. All right, enough of that funny stuff now. So, yeah, humor in writing, or just humor in general and humor in novels, I guess, is kind of what we're going to talk about, which is, I don't know. We'll see how this goes. I guess let's start with our own experiences with humor in writing. And I'm going to start with you because I'm already talking, so I'm going to ask you the question.
Sure.
Did you have some in yours? Was there intentional moments? I think that's like the question we should have for everything. It's like, did you have an intentional moment?
Intentional?
Or did you just write
this? Book intentionally funny?
Yeah. Or did you just come across a moment where you're like, oh, I think I need a little bit of a calmer. I need a breather here and just inject some comic relief to just take down the tension?
I think I write for enjoyment, right? So I write to make myself laugh. And sometimes I laugh at things that aren't necessarily funny, but maybe it's like a juxtaposition or I'm playing with genre tropes or cliches. I certainly wanted to have humor and moments of levity in my book. Certainly not in the moments that I'm trying to be, that I'm trying to instill dread. But yeah, I did kind of want to release some pressure, but it came very naturally, I'd say. I didn't have like a outline that was like, I'm going to have a joke here and a joke there. Yeah. Especially because, I think humor is so tricky to write. Yeah. And I'll say right now, mine's not for everybody.
As someone who's known you for a very, very long time, I think we can use very, very at this point. Very long time. Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
That checks out.
This would almost fit into like one of those pitfall episodes that we have that I think if you are...
Yeah.
You need to be really, really careful and super, super intentional when you're trying to use humor in your book because it can really land like terribly. Yeah. And I think if a joke falls flat or if situational comedy falls flat, I think it takes the reader right out of the story and does a disservice to the narrative. So I don't know how successful I was. I can say that I laughed a ton while writing my book. And I'm sure there's some inappropriate moments. But one like little bit that I kind of came to, I think one of my guiding lights was the narrator shouldn't, because I have like an omniscient third narrator, right? Who kind of has their own personality at moments, but mostly they're kind of echoing the mains. I didn't want the narrator to be humorous, really. The humor that I want it coming from the characters themselves, as opposed to a comment on what they're doing. And I think it's a little safer that way. Like it's a little removed from the author, that if you've done a good enough job building your characters and they're having organic relationships, that you can have them in funny situations or have, funny banter back and forth. And even if that falls flat, I feel like that's a fault of the character.
Yeah.
And maybe, I think you're protected a smidge. It's almost like trying to sound like cool or something. I think is the more you try to be funny or the more you try to come across a certain way, it could feel really, really forced and ruin the flow.
I agree. And I think it's kind of interesting because like obviously obviously you can have straight up books that are just about humor, right? Like Hiker's Guide, right, to the Galaxy. Like that's entirely purposely supposed to be like comedy and satire and funny, right?
And I didn't find it that funny, but I know it's a classic funny book. But it's not my type of humor. But Catch-22, another classic funny book, was funny to me. And I like that. I like satire, I think.
Yeah.
So I'm a ridiculous person. So I was like running and I'm listening to Millennium People by that's in the new Ballard book. He's the guy that wrote Crash. And I'm just laughing out loud because it's like satirical situations in suburbia.
Yeah.
I don't know if many people would find that funny, but it's a funny book, right?
Yeah. Coming back to something you kind of touched on earlier too, is kind of like maybe knowing when to use humor, and I guess how is interesting because I was thinking about this, like knowing like you kind of need to know your genre pretty well to I think to know when to drop in humor.
Yeah.
Because like most books I read, like are gonna be sci-fi thrillers, and some of them will have some jokes here and there. Like the thrillers I read, it's like very dead one or two lines, unless you get like the cheeky like the Jack Reacher guy who's like cheeky, this kind of deadpan humor that no one else gets, but he kind of laughs to himself, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is like
And that's character based, right? Like it kind
yes,
of it makes the character seem what, removed or above it or cool or
yeah. It's well, I think it's more of like making him seem. It's more wise ass humor to like make him
mm,
seem like he's the smartest guy in the room, which that's what he's supposed to be,
okay.
Which can kind of that's like I feel like that's like a real tight line to balance because then you just be like, well, this guy's just an asshole. I'll even say like the Mark Watney character from The Martian, like that. I read that book and I enjoyed it, and I'm come at me, internet. But like I like the book felt like a research paper with just snarky, wise ass comments throughout.
Hmm.
But that's the character, right? And like that's his personality.
So why didn't that humor work for you in The Martian?
I think I don't. I think because it just the character just came across as just feeling like a snarky, wise ass guy I would not want to have a beer with.
Mm, yeah.
At least the Jack Reacher character, I'm like, all right, well, I mean, it's not as I guess maybe it's not as smart. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
because the genres are very completely different. You have sci-fi versus a thriller.
So if we're talking character archetypes here, would they both fit into like the rogue role,
Oh,
or is that
oh,
something
interesting.
different?
You mean? I guess I'm
Or is
probably.
it just standard hero?
I think it's maybe a little bit of a mix, right? The
Yeah.
hero plus a little bit of rogue, but I don't know, did you read The Martian?
No, I didn't.
And his follow-up book to the Hail Mary Project, it's kind of the same thing. It's kind of like the same character, kind of like a snarky. But thinking about it, it's like, well, this is it's a one-person show, kind of in both. The second book is I'm not going to spoil it, but there's another character in there, and they're both kind of like get this humor exchange between each other, which is interesting because just the concept of the book, but yeah, I guess like there's a certain point where if you just have one character, maybe that's what you have to rely on to kind of provide some relief where you have this character that's just snarky and kind of a wise ass. But pulling back here a bit, knowing your genre well enough to know when to inject that humor.
Yeah, totally.
And I think also knowing like I guess your whole character setup too. It's like if you're going to make this kind of like a light adventure and fun,
Yeah.
sure. But if it's going to be like a Tom Clancy thing, there's going to be no humor in there at all or something like that. Cause like it's very specific and it's a tight,
Yeah.
kind of,
I like the know your genre, right? And I think that comes with prep before you sit down and start writing, having a really, really deep knowledge of your comps and,
yeah.
books that fit right within that genre. Because I think you're right. Unless you're really intentionally trying to do something different or you're commenting on the genre or you're mixing genres,
Yeah.
having something like a Tom Clancy book with a narrator that's like a Jack Reacher
Would
probably
not,
wouldn't fit.
it wouldn't work. It doesn't
Yeah.
work. Other things I think that another kind of key piece to like anything you have in a novel or any story you're doing, I think having intentionality behind the choices and the things you're doing, I think that applies to humor too, right? I think you also touched on this earlier. I think having the intentionality of like whatever this is a comic relief moment, it's a reveal of a character, or
Mm,
even the smallest thing of like kind of like a fight scene. Don't just have a fight scene just for the sake of having a fight scene because it's cool.
right.
Don't have a joke just because you thought this funny joke and you're going to drop it in here. It's going to be so jarring. Like there should be a reason for it. There should be some conflict in a way kind of attached to
Yeah.
it, I think,
Yeah.
to make it land, which I think would make it land even more than if it's a kind of a flat joke, So
Yep.
if that makes sense.
No, that does make sense. I mean, I'll say with the what I tried to do in mine, it was less about dialogue and more about situational comedy, like the absurdity of it. And I think that's really common in genre, in horror, that things are so kind of ridiculous sometimes,
Yeah.
um, that it becomes absurd,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
And I love the idea of having like a satirical horror book, you know, and because like I said before, I absolutely love satire, and I love that, like I love Inherent Vice, you know, it's one of my
Hmm.
favorite humorous
Yeah.
novels that like I was cracking up reading that book, absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
But it's hard to do. You could read out of context, or if you're not familiar with the genre, a scene from from my last book, and you would just think it's disgusting, right?
Yeah.
Like, even though it's like maybe I'm intentionally trying to do something that's a little referential to Evil Dead 2 and like the slapstickiness of that.
Yeah.
But if you're not familiar with those kind of tent poles of like genre history, it'd just be like, wow, you're just being gross, you know, for
Yeah.
gross sake, even though
Yeah.
um, it's supposed to be kind of silly in that moment.
And I think horror is like the best genre to have that juxtaposition, right? I know I've said this in episode whatever it was, but I keep thinking about that moment you and I went and saw Midsummer together, and we watched that one
Yeah.
scene. That one scene, it was like a Looney Tunes episode moment, and I think we were the only two people laughing, which probably
Oh
says
yeah.
some says something about us, but it was like so stupidly right in front of us and so just like obvious, like when the person jumps off the old, yeah, and they pan over and there's a guy with a giant hammer. I'm like, I wonder if this is going to come back. It was so Looney Tunes. It was like,
Yeah.
it's so goofball, like it really. And I wonder if that's intentional because like you don't need,
I think so.
right, to like just show how ridiculous this is, but it was so like comical and cartoony of a moment,
Yeah.
but was like thrown into like this really just kind of weird, terrible thing where the old people have to kill themselves by jumping off a cliff and landing on like a little like
Yeah, there's an
pedestal of
absurdity to
concrete.
that movie that I think is very, very intentional.
Yeah,
But once again, not for everybody.
not for everybody, and I'm not sure if everyone. I think people were like really wrapped up in the moment of this being like, oh my god, they're gonna jump to their death, and you're waiting for it, and they cut out, and there's a giant hammer this guy's holding. Like, come on, like you gotta laugh. I mean, that's just funny. Like that's stupid. But I think you also touched on something I agree with, and just kind of expanding on it further is writing stuff that makes you laugh. I think is kind of important.
Yeah.
Don't write jokes for other people to laugh at that you're not laughing at, because like what's the point, you know? If you don't find it
Yep.
funny, then just cut it out. Or if you feel like you're forcing something because maybe someone else might like it, that's you
Yeah.
know, or forcing it to like maybe fit like a wider audience or something like,
I totally agree. Like if
yeah,
you're stepping
cut it.
outside your own comfort zone to try to be funny, like if you're being inauthentic to yourself as a writer, I can guarantee you that it's probably going to fall flat. I mean, I think one kind of sad but yet positive idea here is that write as yourself,
Yeah,
write the things that will make you laugh, and take stock in the fact that you're not that unique, and that the things that you might find funny, others probably will, right?
yeah,
If it's like authentic to yourself. But if you're pandering to a supposed audience, or I completely agree. If you're trying to be inauthentic in a moment to like cater to this imagined audience, I think it's going to fall flat because it's
yeah.
not tied to you as a writer and what you genuinely think is funny.
And I think it's what falls into like the category of finding your voice too. And
Hmm.
once you get comfortable enough to creating and writing characters and be able to jump into each one and have them being distinct and having their own thing, and understanding who might be humorous and who may not be, but also understanding like that person maybe who isn't funny the entire book, dropping a line somewhere might be
Yep.
kind of the right moment. And everyone, you know,
Yeah.
maybe that's a thing that just works. So, but I think that will take time. I mean, I'm still figuring it out. We're all still
And
figuring it
and I
out,
think
but
that will come naturally. I mean, obviously, like we start a book, you've got your characters planned, you've got your scenes planned, you've got your beats planned, you've done all the planning. But the characters themselves and the interactions they have, for me, that's something that happens very organically as you begin to learn about the characters, and they kind of, not that they magically turn into, you know, creatures or something with their own will, but in your mind, they become more formed, and what they will say and how they interact with other folks comes when you're deep in a novel. I don't know if you can prepare for that necessarily, but I do think if you do your character work in the beginning and you know what type of archetypes you're working for and how they work with or against other archetypes that they're, you know, either in conflict with or working with,
yeah,
that's where humor will come from. I think from that tension, from that difference in character and that difference in perspective.
yeah,
That's where I found it initially. And then looking forward in the next book, I don't think I'm going to have any humor, or at least very, very little humor. It's not it's not a humorous book. I'm trying to write a scary book.
yeah,
And I think there will be some small moments where there's like character moments in dialogue that have some reprieve, but overarchingly, the first one for me was was supposed to be like a fun jaunt, and this
Right.
one's supposed to be like dread central and
Yeah.
make people feel like really scared.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
humor doesn't have its place, at least not. It won't be as pervasive as it was in the first novel.
Yeah.
How was it for you in your first book? Did you go in intentionally with humor in mind, or did it just come out naturally because, of your history in comedy
Because I'm
and
just a funny guy.
it's because you're a naturally
You
charming,
can say
funny
it.
guy?
You can say it. You can say it. You can let the world know, Tim. It's okay. Similar to what you were saying, I wanted it to be kind of a fun adventure feel, I didn't want it to feel seep deep in the thriller genre or espionage genre. So, yeah, I definitely wanted to be a little bit lighthearted, and I definitely wanted a bit of, like, I think my personality to come through. And I did have one character who I kind of wanted to be like the Mark Watney, the, kind of wise assy character, that tropey kind of character. But I didn't want him overpowering the whole thing, because that just gets exhausting, I think. And so I did go into an intentionality of like, okay, I have one character who will be the comic relief, but it took me a while to figure out how to do that correctly. I didn't know, so I kind of just left it. So I think the first draft or so didn't really have much to it. There might have been like a couple of moments I threw a line or two in. But it was actually, and I've mentioned this before, it was my mom who gave me the idea, the advice of like, you have these two people who are really close friends, and it seems like they have kind of fun, witty banter. She's like, you need to up that witty banter between them. And you can have one person be the straight guy and one guy being the color guy. And it's like, you have Elliot, who's kind of the level-headed, trying to get through the situation, and you have Jake, who's kind of like the really smart, wise assy character who can come out with these witty, sarcastic lines here and there. So,
And her advice, right, was to draw on your own experience with your friends, right?
yeah.
She was like, you have that type of relationship with a few of your friends, pull from it, which I think is
Yeah.
just like we said, 10 minutes ago, pull from your own experience
Yeah.
for things like that. And you'll end up having authentic, humorous, hopefully, interactions between these characters.
Yeah, 100%. That's why it's like, sometimes I'll have funny moments with friends, and I'll, in the background of my head, like, oh, don't forget, remember that one.
Let's use that.
Let's use that. Maybe rework that in some shape or
I'd
form.
love to have that as a whole episode because I feel very conflicted about. I think you have to mine from friendships. We'll talk about it in another episode. But
Mining friends for your own fortune.
yeah, I've got numerous examples of friends who have like pilfered from others' experience, and I'm like, are you a parasite? Like,
Just yep.
yes, give me all of that.
Give me all of it. The first draft, second draft, it wasn't there until like the third or fourth where I found the characters and kind of discovered who was going to be who and who was going to be filling what roles. And Jake becomes like kind of my tropey, wise assy character slash, comic relief here and there.
Yeah.
But it usually comes at, a moment of tension relieving too. And I was trying to pay attention to that. I didn't want it to just be, he was just doing it for the sake of doing it. So that comes back to like kind of, there's this conflict maybe in the room and he's involved or maybe other people are involved and he's just like, all right, let's settle this down. And he'll drop some line. But that was also fun to write.
And my first, my main is not humorous at all. Situationally, she's in funny things. I do think that I start too quickly with humor. Not in the prologue, but in the first chapter. I think there's this kind of unfortunate commentary humor. I kind of need to I don't know. I need to reduce probably as I'm querying and people are looking at the first 10 pages and being like, not funny. But I do have two characters who are comedic, right? I've got one who's kind of like the B character who is straight up comedic relief and very intentional in that way. And then I've got one of the antagonists who is kind of intentionally funny and ludicrous in his own right. So yeah, I mean, I was intentional with those characters, I think. It remains to be seen whether that lands or not. It's landed for myself and a few of the beta readers, but
I was kind of digging up on humor in novels, the old Google search research, and I came across this article from James Scott Bell, who's a thriller author. He's written a bunch of stuff. He's also written about a lot of books about writing. I think I've got one called Setting and Description or something like that he's done. pretty prolific in the how-to and approaching type of resources. It's good stuff. I highly recommend you like take a look through some of his books. But I came across an article he wrote, and from it was like someone had asked, like, "Oh, I'm not that funny of a writer. How do I incorporate, humor, blah, blah, blah." And he broke it out and into like kind of there's three different ways you can weave humor into a novel. There's like situational, there's descriptive, and then there's conversational, which I think is kind of interesting to explore because you were touching on this from like you didn't want the narrator to be the one who is making the jokes, which would be like descriptive, right? Versus like conversational where the characters in the world are making the joke or doing the humor or something. So I think that's kind of interesting because I think about descriptive. I think if you're writing a first person, like a novel in a first person, like that's where descriptive humor could come through because you're in the head of the character who is either funny or not, but they see something in the world and they kind of make it funny. Or like maybe their similes or metaphors that they use to describe something might be funny.
I want to pull on that just a little bit because you're right that I didn't really want to use a narrator to do it. But as far as descriptive, I think at least in genre, there's times where I try to surprise the reader with the extent of what's happening. Like it seems like things are going too far in one direction, whether it's like hyperviolence or hypergore or whatever it is, but something just like kind of pushing, trying not to be edgy, but it's trying to be surprising, right? And I think that there is some, I hope, at least in some of the books that I read, like when it goes just that one step further, it elicits humor from me. Like it makes me laugh a little bit. So I think if you can do something in genre that surprises with description, it's a way to get around the narrator kind of being a comedic voice, but you can describe a scene as being kind of ridiculous and outlandish and elicit some joy in the reader.
Coming back to description, using description as like your moments in humor, I find because I'm like 40 pages done with Salem's Lot, Stephen King's Salem Lot, and I find he does that a lot. He does like little kind of quips in his description of like scenes, his similes, and like you kind of pick up some humor. It's kind of like it's not overt.
He tries to be funny. Like, his narrators try, like he inserts himself in there, and it doesn't always land.
No,
I love King. I think he's a great writer. Period. And I think that he tries to be a cool guy sometimes when he writes. He's got like cool guy narrator persona. And it's one of the few things in his writing that does not work for me. Like sometimes he'll step over and it takes me out because now I'm picturing like King giggling to himself at his typewriter, you know? But he does try to come across as cool a lot of the time and humorous as the narrator, not as, the narrator as character type of thing.
I'm trying to think, like, I don't think I did that at all because, like, I did third person limited. So I might have had some moments where, like, a character was maybe coming into a scene and describing it or whatever. And maybe there was some humor that came across, but I don't think I never just did that intentionally if it's in there.
It comes naturally to me and I had to edit it out. I think because of, like, where I'm coming from and what I read in my 20s.
Yeah.
Like, I think there's, like, a lot of satirical humor and like Bret Easton Ellis and Chuck Palahniuk and DeLillo and all that stuff. So it comes out naturally, and then when I reread it, I'm like, oh, I'm trying to sound like edgy or something. It just comes out as kind of try-hardy and like if you're critiquing and commenting on everything, it's like an area for growth for me. So it comes naturally, and then I kind of try to edit it away.
I definitely leaned all on the conversational. Like that was my setup. It's like wasn't not so much in description, and if it wasn't intentional. But it's funny because I've written some bits in like first person, and I've definitely leaned into that like descriptive humor from like the character describing a situation. Don't have a lot of situational like moments that are funny, like a scene or anything like that scene from Midsummer. That would be a situational kind of comedy, I think, humor, right? But I definitely leaned all on conversational because I like the banter, I like the wittiness, I like the characters, like one character just kind of dropping these lines and that back and forth. So definitely the way I lean because I just enjoy that too.
It's so funny because from afar I wouldn't describe my book as like a humorous book, but as you're talking about these three different types of humor, I use all of them. And maybe I lean on all of them a little much, but geez, it was fun to write.
I mean, at the end of the day, right? Like that's the goal, right? As long as you're having fun writing and then also making yourself laugh, then whatever.
Just to chat about the conversational humor for a second, because I think that we touched on this a little bit, but I do think it's worth kind of reiterating that it needs to be tied to your character's journey in your
Mm.
character's development. It can't just be floating off as an island.
Yeah.
I think using conflict, between characters is a great way to do that. And the struggle of your character to move forward or alter in whatever way they have to alter through their acts, through their metamorphosis machine. But it needs to be part of their arc. To me, I think if it's dislodged from that trajectory of the character changing, I think you're going to lose the audience just a little bit. Like humor for humor's sake, unfortunately, I don't think is at least when we're talking about conversational.
Hmm.
I think it needs to reflect back on each character. And if it's not so much tied to a change in that moment, at least it's establishing who the characters are in that world very firmly, what their beliefs are,
A
and who they are
reveal.
going to be moving forward. Yeah.
Yeah, like a
Yep.
reveal of them in some shape or form. Yeah, I
Yep.
totally agree. Because again, like, it comes back to you being authentic, but then also the characters coming across as authentic and believable. Because if they start doing stuff that just doesn't fit, then it's just can't start throwing out knock knock jokes in the middle of like
Yeah.
a horror or whatever. It's not gonna work. So
Yep.
maybe someone could make it work. I don't know. You
Not
listeners,
me.
go rate that scene. Go rate a knock knock joke in a tense horror movie. Honestly, when we came up with like talking about this topic, I didn't think we were going to have anything to talk about, and I didn't think we were going to be nearly as funny as we were. So I think this all
Come
worked
on,
out.
man.
I think this all
I
worked
knew
out.
you were going to be
This
super
is
funny.
very situational, conversational humor we're doing right now. I think.
Oh
So,
yeah, man.
no descriptive, but we're very conversationally funny people. I think. But yeah, I think it ended up being kind of interesting exploration of humor in writing in novels and looking at the ways we've implemented it and approached it.
Yeah, it's one of those tools I think that can really support your characters and your narrative and really you can really engage the reader, or you can completely misuse it and take your reader out and it could turn into a giant pitfall. So it's one of those things that just like everything else, you need to be super intentional about.
Yeah.
Um, and that's not to say you need to be, I think first draft wise, go nuts, whatever. But as you're going back through your edits, have a really critical eye of when you're being funny, why you're being funny, and making sure that it's reflecting back on your characters and their journey.
Yeah, I agree. And then knowing which ways to implement that humor too, whether it's through the conversational, descriptive, or situational, like James Scott Bell had was kind of touching on. Because yeah, because it also plays into the genre too. I could see situational being very in a horror situation, maybe horror genre that would kind of fit a bit more and be like juxtaposition.
Yeah.
And descriptive could be interesting from like a character's point of view and maybe a revealing detail that makes them kind of adds a little depth to them that I think is something important to think about.
Here's my last minute aside that you'll have to edit out.
It better be a knock knock joke.
Knock, knock. So, one thing that I don't think ever works is humor during exposition. Like if for some reason your hands are tied and you have to do like a tell don't show, which as writers we're all like, we know we should be showing and not telling, but there's always some moment where like you need to use a character to explain something. It just
Yeah.
happens. When that character is trying to be humorous while they're explaining something, I don't think it works.
No,
I don't think it works at all.
I'm trying to think if I did that. I'm wondering if I think I did that in the sense of, again, my comic relief character who's, the wise ass, the Mark Watney of the room. I think maybe he did that like kind of like sarcasm kind of things, maybe when he was explaining something complicated.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
may have used it then. So,
But is he
but
explaining to characters or is it this kind of for the audiences? Like everybody kind of knows, but one character is reiterating what's happening.
it's for the audience. I think there's like, I do have a moment of like back and forth between him and another like
Okay.
smarty pants per character. And I try to deliver exposition in a fun way through a conversation. But it's quick, it's short. It's not like, I'm trying to catch people back up with like, oh, here's what's going on technology wise, but I'm going
Well, I
to throw
take back what I said. I like when you do it,
Oh,
but I
thanks.
don't
Oh,
like when
yeah,
other
yeah.
people do it.
Yeah, okay. All right. Don't change that 5-star rating. All right. Well, I think that's it. I think yeah, I think that's good. That's good stuff. So what have you been reading and watching?
So, reading or listening to, I said before, I'm listening to Millennium People by Ballard. He'd written Crash. He wrote High Rise. I don't think he would necessarily be, maybe people see him as a humorous author, but love his writing style. I love his situational comedy. I love the satire. It's great. Millennium People is kind of about like anarchy in suburbia in a way. It almost feels like British haughty Fight Club. It's like the third act of Fight Club when Project Mayhem
Yep.
takes off, except it's like suburban upper middle class
Okay.
kind of rebelling against their cushy lives that aren't cushy enough.
Yeah.
Um, but it's done with such a clear eye, and it's kind of a first person narrative that it's just very, very humorous. So yeah, I totally recommend it. He's a wonderful writer. Trying to think what else I'm reading. Oh, I'm still like kind of plucking away my way through that second book and the Southern Reach trilogy,
Oh yeah.
the
Yep.
sequel to Annihilation
Yeah.
Authority.
Yep.
That is not funny at all.
I don't imagine it being.
No
Not one
humor
bit.
there.
No.
I finished Fallout. Very funny, very intentionally funny.
Likewise.
And I think that does a lot of, if we're talking about humor, that's a lot of description and situational humor.
Yeah.
It's the ridiculousness of the world and how the characters interact. Nobody's necessarily telling jokes, but it's the ludicrousness of the situation that
Yeah.
elicits humor.
And the
And then,
juxtaposition of the extreme violence with the humor.
with the innocence of the vault dweller,
Yeah.
and like who kind of has that born yesterday trope.
Yes. Old
Who,
naive
yeah,
child
the
in the world.
naive.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's about it for me. How about you?
Nice. Well, reading wise, I was like reading 3 or 4 books all at one time, and I realized I can't do that because I have a small human brain. So I decided just to focus on Salem's Lot, which I've been slow getting through, not because I just haven't been reading as much, but I'm like 40 pages away from finishing that. I'll finish it today.
How are you feeling about it so far?
I'm enjoying it. Yeah, I'm enjoying it. I don't think I knew what it was actually going to be about, to be honest. Like, but now I'm into it. I'm like, oh, this is fun. I don't know. It's kind of fun to me. And it's Stephen King, so his writing is very breezy and easy to
Yeah.
read. Definitely has his descriptive jokes, your humor he kind of forces in there, as we were talking about earlier. But it's still very enjoyable. I'm just like close to finishing that. I'll finish that today.
Yeah, for me, the scope of Salem's Lot was bigger than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah,
It was super enjoyable.
yeah. I mean, again, he's done this before, and I think we talked about it a couple episodes ago. But he does this thing where the town becomes a character, and all the people within that town become so much a part of it and so important. So he does all this like buildup of all a million characters in this entire town, and then so he picks them off like as the book carries on. You're like,
Yeah.
okay, there's intentionality there a bit, among other things. So
I love it when he does that because I mean, it just makes the change in the town's metamorphosis. Like you feel the loss, I think,
Yeah.
in a way that you wouldn't otherwise.
yes. Yeah, you feel this big sense of dread, which I felt that with
Yeah.
The Stand as well, because he did that similarly, where he just had like these millions of characters, and then like one chapter he had like like small paragraph for each one. He just wiped them out. I'm like, what are you doing? Just had all this backstory about this person, and like one paragraph, like, yeah, and he was dead. And then he was dead. I was like, oh, okay. And it's just like,
Yeah.
I think it builds this really deep sense of dread when you just feel all these people who you kind of got a good idea who they are, and then
Yeah.
just wipes them all out. You're like, oh, okay, that's fine. But enjoying that. Kind of pause the other books I was reading, but I'll get a kind of reset after I finish Salem's
Yeah.
Lot. Kind of figure out what I'm
A
going to
couple episodes ago, I think you'd mentioned Salem's Lot. We were talking about characters and towns, and I talked about Tom Perrotta and The
Yeah.
Leftovers
Yes.
and how I was getting towards the end of that. And I've since finished it. And at that moment, the town obviously became a character unto itself. It was very cool, but at that moment, I couldn't see how it was going to end. I
you
didn't
mentioned that.
know what the Act 3 was going to be.
Yeah.
And now that I've gotten through it, the beats are crystal, like
Yeah.
absolutely crystal clear.
Yeah.
And for me, that's just such a sign of great writing that in a great third act where I didn't know where it was going,
Yep.
and yet it couldn't have ended any other way. So I know I harp on third acts a lot of the time, but there are examples of good ones, and I think Parada's really talented, and I think The Leftovers is a really good example of a third act that closes out character journeys
Yeah.
while not closing out the story at large, right?
Yeah,
I couldn't
yeah.
see it because I was thinking too reductively. Like,
Yep.
what's going to happen? Like, what's the final thing that's going to happen with all these characters? Like, is it Salem's Lot where a bunch of people are dead?
Yeah.
And this is like, no, it's the people the characters were before, they're dead
Yep.
in a
Yep.
way. And they're new people stepping into the world in a new way. And just huge, huge thumbs up for that book. I'd recommend it to anybody who's interested in how to write a good third act because it's great.
And then that's it for reading for me. For watching wise, I haven't really been watching much. I finished Fallout, which I thought was great. I feel like I started something somewhere on one of the services and I totally lost track of where it was. So I don't know if I was watching it anymore. One of those things, right? Yeah. I think I started a show maybe on like Amazon Prime or something. And I was like, was that on Netflix? Now I can't find it. So I don't know. I don't know what I'm watching anymore.
How do you feel about the writing? So I think Fallout is great. I don't think the writing is great. I think, well, do I mean that? I mean, I certainly like the world and the characters and how they're interacting. But when I look at the threads of how everything kind of gets connected at the end, it feels very paint by the numbers. And maybe you need to be very simple with those character arcs because the world, for those who haven't played the game, is so kind of complicated and new.
Yeah. I also think that they were banking on a second season being done because it doesn't wrap up night. You know what I mean? There's a lot. I mean, it kind of sort of does, but there's still a lot left over, you know?
Yeah.
And that feels like you'll get that sense of like things, the connective tissue maybe being a little loose just because, we got season 2 in the can and, you know, are ready to go, you know? So,
I mean, it was way better than Silo.
I agree, but I like Silo. So,
not to keep rambling on here, but did you ever get to watching the 3-Body Problem on Netflix?
No, maybe that was the one I started and I just forgot about it. Thanks for reminding me.
Okay. No, it's okay. My whole pitch is that you can forget about it.
And then for watching wise, what did I watch? Well, for the other podcast, I did watch this hilarious movie called, last night, late night, called Saw 3. Hilarious.
Intentionally hilarious?
Have you seen, how far have you gone in the Saw franchise? They're up to 10, by the way, which 10 is like over 80% on Rotten Tomatoes, like over 85 on, it's crazy how like apparently it's very good.
Yeah, well, good for a Saw movie. I think they're graded on a level of Saw movies.
Well, sure. Yeah.
Like Saw 2 was actually pretty good.
Donnie Wahlberg. So
well, Saw 2 wasn't originally a Saw movie. Like it was something else that they kind of, after the success of the original Saw, they're like, oh, we need a script. Oh, you've got a script. That's Saw now.
Yeah. And apparently they greenlit the third one because obviously these movies just make money and they cost nothing.
They cost like a nickel, right? They're like $5 to $10 million movies or something.
Saw 3 was $10 million. That was the most expensive one. The first one was $4 million. They all made like over hundreds of millions of dollars. Like the third one made $170 million or something on a $10 million. So of course you're going to make a fourth one even if it has 10% on Rotten Tomatoes.
I think I made it as far as Saw 6. And then I think once Saw 3D came out, I was like, nah.
All set. No,
I don't know why.
I mean, I watched the first one. The first one was, I thought that's a great movie for what it is. Like,
yeah, for a low budget indie horror movie.
Awesome.
One of the few movies I bought before, just because the buzz was so, and the marketing was so good around that movie.
Yeah.
So good. The movie's, it's kind of mid.
Yeah.
But
it's
it's like a poor man's Seven, right?
Yes. But I've never watched any of the other ones. I didn't watch the second one. After the first one, I was like, cool, I'm good. And then for the other podcast, because we do movies that are under 30%, we couldn't do the first and second one because they're over, 40% or 30%. So we're jumping and doing the third one. And I figured all the backstory already. And I guess they jump at a timeline, for the later movies and everything, because they are working with borrowed time in terms of, you know what I mean? This thing hit gangbusters. We need to make up stuff as we go. So
like an inter-equal, right? I think the most recent one is like not a prequel, but not a sequel. It's somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
Which honestly, that would be my pitch for the Friday the 13th movies. They need to do like an inter-equal somewhere in the 80s. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
That's a good idea though. But anyways, I watched that last night. Hilarious.
But not intentionally hilarious, was it?
I don't think so. I hope not.
I mean, there is the traps and the ludicrousness of the torture genre.
Yeah. So many keys. If cops just went to the local hardware store and found who's ordering all the keys, they would know who, someone's got to come in and get these keys. There's a million keys. Just go check your local.
Look at the key maker.
Yeah, just go.
Maybe he makes his own keys.
Go to your local Home Depot and just be like, "Hey, is someone coming in and order 1,000 keys?" His name is this guy. He lives right over here.
He wears a pig mask.
He's really nice. And a lot of saws. He got a lot of saws too.
I love saws and keys.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a sign. But yeah, that's it. I watched that, and I haven't watched much else. So are we done here? We're wrapping this up.
I'm done. You gonna end on a joke? You got anything to share with me?
I do not. That's our
Aw.
episode. Thanks for listening. Join us next one time. We're going to be getting into starting again.
Yeah, I think so. Where to begin again, since we are beginning again, I think we are new
Wiser.
people.
Or wiser.
Wiser than
Older.
we were. We
Older.
can give better advice than we did 51 episodes ago,
I'm not
52
listening. I'm
episodes
not
ago.
listening to that first episode. I know you said that was our homework, but I don't know.
Yeah, you got to listen to it.
My voice. Anyways, yes, that's what we're going to get into. And but if you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who you might think would enjoy it as well. I need to work on the wording there. You can follow us on Instagram at Writer Syndrome Books if you want to reach out and come on the show, the episodes, and interview. If you're an author, whatever, reach out to us. If you have any topic ideas, hit us up. And you can find us all of our old episodes at writersyndrome.com.